me just introduce Professor Laura Moretti. So she is Professor of Early Modern Japanese Literature and Culture at Cambridge University. I think by early modern we mean Edo period. And she's also a Fellow of Emmanuel College. And she's published quite a few books and articles on this sort of area. One of her other features is that Laura runs this summer school every year on how to read difficult Japanese manuscripts. You know, they're brush written in all sorts of different styles in different periods. And Laura is the big expert on that, and people come from all over the world to Cambridge every summer to learn from her how to read this stuff. Anyway, so today she's going to be talking about Kusazōshi, grass books. And before I get into any further deep waters, I will leave it to Laura herself to tell you about them.
Allow me to take you to Japan at the beginning of the 19th century. We are in 1801 and we find ourselves close to the bustling commercial area of Nihonbashi in the mega city of Edo. Among many shops, you will stumble upon what you see in this image, which is from Shikitei Samba Unobore Kagami, the mirror of Shikitei Samba's ego. This is a bookshop. The name on the sign reads Nishinomiya Shindoku. This is his establishment. Take a look at this inviting space. There are piles of woodblock printed books and single sheet prints. Look again. A man is sitting in the middle of the scene, his nose in a book, literary. Look at the book that he's holding in his hand. Rather than a booklet, it is probably a booklet. It would look exactly like the one I'm holding in my hand right now. It would be relatively small, around 18 per 13 centimeters, and the cover of the book in his hand is similar indeed to the one that you see here. This was a standard design for covers of what I will call today graphic narratives. And Shikitei Samba Unobore Kagami, the book in which this image appears, is indeed an example of a graphic narrative. Now look again, this time zooming out and taking in the double page spread that is open in front of you in all its components. Text written mainly in easy-to-read phonetic script occupies the blank spaces amid the image. The text and image do not only share the same physical space of the printed page, they work in tandem to co-create meaning. As such, the book we are engaging with is multimodal. Two modes, the visual and the verbal, are combined and their combination creates meaning. This combination was made easy by the use of the woodblock printing technology. Let's first look at the images and form a mental idea of what this double page spread is about. This would indeed have been the mode of reading adopted back in 1801. Clearly, this is a space that enables social interaction. The shop apprentice, a young boy, is showing a book to two customers, a woman and a man whose outfit suggests his social status as belonging to the warrior class, a bushi. Are they chatting? If so, about what? Our curiosity is piqued. But one thing is certain, gender was of no concern. They are both here looking at graphic narratives. At the back, there are two men. The one looking at us with a rather smug face and a pipe in his right hand has a logographic character on his left sleeve that reveals his identity. Shikitei Samba, this is the author of the book we are reading. The identity of the man with the back to us is also revealed by two logographic characters, two kanji, this time on his back. He is Nishinomiya Shindoku, the owner of the shop and the publisher of the book that we are perusing. He's reading a book that for a reader back in 1801 would have immediately appeared for what it is, the manuscript for a new graphic narrative. So what is going on between the two men? Are they discussing a new publication? This would make sense considering that at this point in time, booksellers would normally double up as publishers. On the left, hanging at the end of a bookshelf, is an advertisement. It alerts readers to the existence of a different work penned by the same author, Shikitei Samba, and illustrated by the same artist of the book we are looking at, Utagawa Toyokuni. Clearly, this is a space defined by its commercial nature. Books are produced and sold, authors interact with publishers, customers are enticed to buy ever more. You may have noticed that we have been slowly shifting from the visual to the verbal mode. Looking has begun to encroach on reading. We have begun to read the text. And it is by reading the text in its entirety that all the questions raised by engaging with the illustration first are answered. So what text, you may be thinking? The narration is at the top. A third-person narration tells a story. At the bottom are speech lines singled out by the presence of diacritic marks. They're very small, but they're there. There are no speech balloons. These speech lines are placed somewhat near the person who is most likely uttering them, but it is down to the reader to understand who is saying what. There is no clear reading order. Once again, it is down to the reader to decide in what order to read the speech lines. So let's read. The narration at the top tells us that there are many talented authors of graphic narratives and that publishers normally nag them for new works. This is not the case for Samba. Samba is one such author, but he has to take his works to the publisher himself to get published. Shinroku is probably reading the draft manuscript of Samba's new creation. The narrator mocks the very author who has given him life. We read that that while Samba, the author in the text, blows his own trumpet, hitori miso o agete, and is convinced of the value of his work, who is not, the publisher Shinroku pays lip service but inwardly thinks that the manuscript is complete rubbish. Nekkara omoshiroko ne honda. This metafictional raillery downplays the value of the author's work and implicitly that of the text that we are reading, a type of ostensible self-deprecation that often appears in early modern graphic narratives in Japan. The manuscript mentioned in the text and depicted in the image could well be one of the same very book that we are reading. We are never told this. But blurring the line between reality and fiction and drawing attention to the fictional, constructed nature of the object we are holding in our hands, what we know as metafiction, was a cherished technique of early modern Japanese graphic narratives. Let's read some of the speech lines. The man's words reveal that he's an aficionado of this type of book and gives voice to his frustration at the rise in prices. These books used to be 6 copper coins and now they are 10. Outrageous. He asks for a discount. The apprentice explains that 6 copper coins was the price of graphic narratives when they were in their infancy. The price is now around 10 per volume for titles that would normally come in 2 or 3. If we consider that the entrance to the public bath in 1811 would have been around 10 copper coins and that the often invoked soba noodles soup in a basic soup would be 16 copper coins, it is clear that these were very cheap books. As you can see, it is by interacting with both the verbal and the visual mode that we can, little by little, make sense of what is on the page. This is a multimodal book. It is a Kusazōshi, as they were called from the end of the 17th century till the end of the 19th century, and how they are now called in Japanese literary histories. In dissecting the one double-page spread, as we have done, I have brought to the fore some of the key features of Kusazōshi. Multimodality, their commercial nature of cheap and small-sized books, and the appeal they had for adult readers across gender and social standing. and Kusazōshi are the topic of the edited volume that I'm here to present to you today. Graphic Narratives from Early Modern Japan, the World of Kusazōshi. I co-edited it with Professor Satō Yukiko at the University of Tokyo, and it's published by Brill. I have structured my talk today around 3 points. First, I briefly introduce the aim, the scope, and the structure of the volume, mentioning more key features of Kusazōshi beyond those that we have already touched upon. Second, I answer what is probably a question that is floating in your mind. Are Kusazōshi manga? Are they a type of comic book? And finally, I explore how we can read Kusazōshi on their own terms, which is truly what our volume invites readers to do. So let me start by briefly introducing this volume. We have shaped it to serve a dual purpose. On the one hand, this is the first English language book-length publication that covers the entirety of the history of early modern Japanese graphic narratives, from the late 17th century into the second half of the 19th century, so 200 years. As such, our ambition is for it to be a must-read companion for anyone who is interested in the subject but knows nothing or little about it. The appendix, which has been put together by two of my graduate students, Freddie Fielden and Joseph Bills, who is sitting somewhere in this room over there, who is not a graduate student. He has graduated, but yes, he was at the time. The appendix offers an up-to-date bibliography of English translations of Kusazōshi. So if you want to know what has been translated in English, it's there. As such, it is an invaluable resource for the reader who is curious about early modern Japanese graphic narratives, but does not know any pre-modern Japanese. We also hope that it will be used by instructors in secondary schools and in higher education to entice students to read something other than Japanese contemporary literature. It's a hard sell, I know, but we are trying. While being the go-to guide to early modern Japanese graphic narratives, we have designed the volume in such a way as to inspire also the seasoned scholar of Kusazōshi with fresh avenues of research, hence igniting the desire to produce new research on this phenomenal genre. And we have asked all of our contributors to infuse the chapter with original research and to work not only on canonical Kusazōshi, but also on lesser-known ones which lay dormant in the archive. To achieve these goals, we have worked with 14 authors, half from Japanese language academia, translated into English by our graduate students, and half from English language academia. Each brought first-class competence in specific aspects of the world of Kusazōshi, and some are actually quite giants in the field. And this was the only way to tackle a textual typology that has developed over 200 years in a towering production of approximately, we don't have statistics, but approximately 4,500 to 5,000 titles produced in 200 years. You can see how phenomenal this textual typology was and how popular it was. We approached the publisher, Brill, in 2021, and the book was published in February 2024. I must say it was quite a tight schedule, but yes. And the result is not a light, slim book, but quite a heavy 600-page book, and organized in 3 parts and 16 chapters, plus the appendix. Please allow me to explain how we structured the volume, and along the way, as promised, introduce to some more key features of Kusazōshi, in addition to what we have already seen. And there has been, outside, there is the copy of the table of contents. If you have it with you, you can also refer to it, but I also have slides for each chapter, so don't worry if you do not have it. The volume is organized as a coherent whole in 3 parts. Reading it in its entirety, one chapter after the other, provides you with a structured narrative, which is the narrative we wanted to give. Yet, we have ensured that each chapter can also be read on its own, in line with each specific interest. Part 1, Mediality in Kusazōshi, discusses the feature of Kusazōshi as a medium. Any book lover, book collector, or bibliophile, I am one, as you can see, will find chapter 1 by Elistinius endlessly inspiring. The chapter meticulously reconstructs the materiality of Kusazōshi, analyzing all the material components: sale wrappers, covers, inside covers, title sleeves, size, paper, and much more. If you have never seen a Kusazōshi in its original format, you can build a mental picture of it, and if you are a collector of early modern books, you will understand what to look out for in Kusazōshi. And for those of you who are here in person today, not on the internet, after the talk, you're very much welcome to see some of the originals that I have here, and I'm very happy to talk you through their material aspects if you're interested. And what I find particularly helpful in how we structure chapter 1 is that it guides the cataloger and the scholar of textual scholarship in where to find meaningful bibliographic information in books that lacks colophon. These books have no colophon, so they have no place where they tell us who the author is, who the artist is, or who else has played a part. This information is scattered in the book, and we teach where to look for it. I also would like to highlight the 3 pages table that concludes this chapter. It is a compact but essential overview of how Kusazōshi developed as material objects, and it alerts us to their formats. 200 years, many titles, they actually developed in what turned out to be specific formats. We start with the so-called early Kusazōshi, which include akahon, red cover books, kurohon, black cover books, and aohon, light green cover books. And I have an example of aohon over there. Normally, they're no longer than 2 volumes for a total of 10 folios, 20 pages, very short. We then move to kibyoshi, yellow cover books, and we know that the first kibyoshi was issued in 1775. This format, as a rule, settles on 3 volumes for a total of 15 folios, 30 pages. And finally, we move to gokan, combined booklets. More recent research places their beginning in 1804, and some combine up to 6 volumes. I have an example over there for a total of 30 folios, published in one go. Others are issued over the span of several years, combining up to 142 volumes for a towering number of folios. This understanding of the Kusazōshi format aligns with what previous histories of Kusazōshi have told us. But in chapter 3, Matsubara Noriko questions received knowledge by problematizing the neat development of early Kusazōshi. And I leave all the details to the chapter. But as chapter 1 and chapter 3 showcase, we made sure that chapters are purposefully designed to complement each other. Once our reader has gained an insight of how a Kusazōshi would have looked like, we ask the question of how they were produced. In chapter 2, Takagi Gen dissects a double-page spread from this 1818 gokan. This image is at times invoked in Japanese language publications as it shows the creative team behind the production of a Kusazōshi, and I have used it in my class many times. Yet, until now, no one has ever explored its contents. And chapter 2 fills in this gap. Takagi uses this image to explain the production of Kusazōshi and to introduce the creative team behind it. Thanks to Joseph Bill's masterful translation, we can now read what each member of the creative team feels. Take the publisher. His head is a golden coin. His words betray his true motivation. Financial gain. Everyone work hard and get this done quickly. I'll be there sitting on my backside, making sure things flow smoothly. You know that if you're late, my profits will fall and sales will have to wait for 1 more year. Time is money. And indeed, Kusazōshi were published at the beginning of the new year, so missing that deadline will mean missing the profit for a whole year. We also hear the afflictions of all the other members of the team, from the author to the printer. What is key is that we understand that the creative team responsible for the creation of Kusazōshi went beyond the combination of just author and illustrator. Craftsmen, including the calligrapher, the block cutter, and the printer, they were all equally part of the team. And in later materials, they're actually named in these books. This in turn questions our assumptions around the concept of authorship. Who is the author of these materials? There was an author who would sketch a draft, a manuscript, but the published product would never have been possible without everyone else in the team. Effective teamwork, collective authorship, this is what early modern graphic narratives showcase. As mentioned repeatedly so far, Kusazōshi are multimodal. Chapter 3, 4, and 5 zero in on what we mean by this. Matsubara Noriko starts with Akahon, red cover books. Tsuda Mayumi moves on to Kibyoshi, yellow cover books, and Sato Yukiko ends with Gokan, combined booklets. Read together, these chapters alerts us to the fact that the mise-en-page in Kusazōshi reveals a rich panoply of modulations, and they invite us to unpack the complex and ever-shifting visual grammar of these graphic narratives, and I will say a little bit more later on. Once you have read part 1, you will have a very good grasp of how a Kusazōshi was given life, how it looks like, how you must navigate its components. Part 2, the pleasures of readings, include 7 essays that focus on specific aspects of early modern Japanese graphic narratives, exploring the multifarious pleasures that they unleash. The key question is how and why do we read Kusazōshi? Each chapter offers a specific answer to these questions. Collectively, these chapters direct readers to what Professor Sato and I, as the editors, view as areas of research that are particularly significant in the study of Kusazōshi. And this is where, for the seasoned scholars of Kusazōshi, we offer really fresh and provoking interventions. And the hope really is that we will inspire new work on many more primary sources, and new work that brings to the fore trajectories that our chapters simply did not engage with. After all, thousands of Kusazōshi are lying in the archive, just waiting to be unlocked. Part 3, approaching Kusazōshi in a global context, takes us beyond the early modern period and explores how graphic narratives from the 18th and 19th century have been consumed, framed, and reconceptualized within and without Japan after the 1880s. This is where in chapter 13, Michael Emmerich offers a sophisticated analysis of what he views as the death of Kusazōshi. We were quite unhappy with the word death, since we have a book on Kusazōshi, but he's quite articulated in telling us what he views as the death. And, sorry, that's it. And there is also, this is also where Glyn Wally in chapter 16 delights us with ruminations on the history of translating Kusazōshi into English, reminding us that any act of translation is an act of interpretation. And this is also where we offer provocations on the relationship with comic books and manga. So let's ask the vexed question: can we, should we view Kusazōshi as comic books and or manga? Please indulge me to let me go back to what distinguishes Kusazōshi from other woodblock printed books produced at the time. And I'm going to read. Kusazōshi are a specific form of book-length graphic prose. Multimodal in essence, Kusazōshi combine images and words, asking the reader to negotiate the complex interactions of these different modes on the page. Meaning is created out of such negotiations. This is the concise definition of Kusazōshi that we provide in the introduction. Multimodality sets Kusazōshi apart from other kinds of books in Japan at the time. Undoubtedly, images were a feature of many early modern commercial publications, as Chapter 2 explains. But this is the key role. It is the key role that images play in the creation of meaning that sets Kusazōshi apart. Just remember how we dissected the double page, the first double page spread at the beginning of my talk. Now, Chapter 8 starts with a quotation that is particularly effective in conveying this idea. In 1803, Kyokutei Bakin, who is facing you right now with his big nose, one of the authors that make their appearance in our volume, underscored the importance of illustrations in Kusazōshi by invoking a powerful comparison with the world of warriors. The images are the master and the text his retainer. Kusazōshi wa e o kimi to shi, bun o shin to suru. Pictures are king in Kusazōshi. Let's keep this in mind and let's look at a few more examples. This is from Chapter 3. This double-page spread is from a red cover book in 2 volumes, which narrates the story of fictional character Hachikazuki, who was cherished from medieval times. This synoptic narrative portrays a sequence of dramatic moments in the princess's life. Driven out of her house because of false allegations, of course, by the stepmother, she tries to kill herself by jumping in the river, and then we see her bobbling in the water, almost drowning. You might be happy to know that she did not drown. Text made of captions and narration is inserted in the negative spaces of the printed page. This is another example from Chapter 4. It is a yellow cover book. Imotaro is the protagonist, you can see here. His talent is exceptional. He can fart as no one else. The text, narration, and speech lines is scattered around the page around Imotaro's mighty trump. This is from Chapter 5. It is an example of combined booklets, gokan, and warrior Kampeita has just defeated a gigantic snake, which, by the way, the body of this creature has unfolded in the previous 4 double-page spreads. The text, almost all narration, takes up the majority of the blank spaces. Diacritic marks direct the reader to read, so once you are here, you need to jump over there, very helpful. And there are also a couple of speech lines. To the avid reader of comics, comic books, graphic novels or manga, these pages would appear both familiar and alienating, almost uncanny. As Angelo Piepoli notes, a generalized conception considers comics as literary products produced through the use of a language based on 2 distinct systems of signs, words and images, whose elements are combined into a seemingly, I will not be able to say this word, indissoluble interconnection. So, multimodality. However, confronted with these images from Kusazōshi, something is not quite right. You would all agree with me that key visual features of comic books, graphic novels and manga are in fact missing. There are no panels, no frames, no gutters, no speech balloons, no close-ups, no iconic solidarity. So the question emerges naturally, are Kusazōshi comic books, are they manga? Satō Yukiko and myself, as editors of the volume, make our position clear in the introduction, at least we hope so. We propose to view Kusazōshi as a form of graphic narrative, multimodal in nature but different from comics, comic books, or manga. The choice of translating Kusazōshi, which really, as Jason said, literally means grass booklets, into graphic narratives was not an easy choice. What made this term for us appealing is the nature which is inherently more inclusive than, let's say, comics. And we read a great deal of scholarship by Daniel Stein and Jean-Noël Thon on this topic. Yet, we use the label of graphic narratives with 2 provisos. First, we fully acknowledge that in some Kusazōshi, narrative, i.e. a story, plays very little or no role, and I'll come back to this. They do something else. They don't tell a story. Second, we are aware that graphic narratives are often positioned within the universe of comics, so it's a little bit of a going back to itself situation. Hilary Shute and Marianne de Coven define graphic narratives as book-length work in the medium of comics, recognizing its most basic composition in frames and gutters, which are missing in our Kusazōshi. Yet Kusazōshi, they have no panels, no frames, no gutters. The degree of comicness is very low. Therefore, we make it very clear that we disjoint the Kusazōshi as graphic narratives from the medium of comics. Having made our position clear, we are acutely aware that there are views on the subject which are very different, and that is why we invited Adam Kern and Jacqueline Byrne to be part of our project. In chapter 14, Kern takes what appears, at least on the surface, as an opposite view from ours, and this is exactly what we wanted. Kern views Kusazōshi as comics with an X. In other words, he uses Kusazōshi to push for a broader definition of comic books as texts that co-mix words and images. As multimodal texts, Kusazōshi for him are comics with an X. By initiating what he calls a meaningful dialogue between comic studies and Kusazōshi studies, Kern trusts that both fields will seize the opportunity to interrogate and hopefully overcome what he calls hidden assumptions of cultural hegemony. Believe me, this is a very sophisticated chapter that I'm sure provokes our reader. In chapter 15, a scholar of story manga, Jacqueline Byrne, presents us with a remarkable experiment. Byrne subjects two early modern graphic narratives, two Kusazōshi, to what she calls a manga-esque reading. She's reading them as manga. The results are eye-opening. Byrne asks us to think about aspects of visual storytelling that rarely we, as scholars of Kusazōshi, take up. For example, she asks us to follow the gaze, engage with the body language, and to explore the empathetic response enabled by the visual language. In other words, she asks us to engage with aspects that are key in manga. For Byrne, this analysis leads to the identification of inherent differences between story manga and Kusazōshi. This Kusazōshi version of Lazy Taro and this manga version of Lazy Taro are both multimodal, that is true, but the visual grammar of their multimodality differs in many aspects, leading to dissimilar reading experiences. What is also exciting in the coda of this chapter is that Byrne suggests that illustrated novels, sashie shousetsu, and picture stories, e monogatari, produced between the 1930s and the 1950s, could be viewed as occupying an intermediate position between Kusazōshi and contemporary manga narratives. And this is a new insight, and the hope is that other scholars will test Byrne's proposal by engaging with these materials. We have no doubt that chapter 15 and 14 will spark debate. But to be sure, this is just one side of what our volume tries to do, and it's by no means its core. The core is what I mentioned in relation to part 2. We want readers to learn about Kusazōshi. We want readers to learn how to read Kusazōshi, to learn how to approach them, and to do so in Kusazōshi's own terms. And this is also why we want our readers to go away using the word Kusazōshi. Yes, they are graphic narratives, and that is fine to call them so, but ultimately they are Kusazōshi. And as such, they work in their own way. And our edited volume explores how. In the remaining time, I briefly point to 4 lines of inquiry that I think might be productive for my audience today. So how can we approach Kusazōshi on their own terms? First, our volume explores how to tackle the complex and shifting mise-en-page of the different formats of Kusazōshi. The modern reader of Kusazōshi, that is us, needs to develop competence in how to read what is on the page. Let me repeat, there are no panels, no speech balloons. This means that the visual competence developed in reading other forms of multimodal graphic narratives are of little help when reading Kusazōshi. So our volume assists you in developing this competence. You learn, for instance, that we move from wild double-page spreads where different textual typologies are randomly scattered on the page to spreads where authors have put in place a system that guides the reading order. Here you have no clue of what to do. Here they tell you more what to do. I got the wrong image, but never mind. In chapter 4, I would like to go back to the mise-en-page of our friend Imotaro. Chapter 4 explains how to read the text scattered on the page. And it shows that there is not one way. As readers, we are free to read in the order we think works best, and that order changes the way in which we approach what is narrated. All chapters engage with the close reading of several primary sources. They all contribute to the acquisition of skills on how to navigate the page layout of Kusazōshi. Chapter 4 also tells us that probably back in early modern Japan, reading would have taken the form of a communal activity. Like this family sitting around a kotatsu, several readers would gather around the book debating what to read when. So it was actually a moment of fun socialization. The act of reading would have been turned really into a moment of discussing how we navigate the page. And finally, chapter 4 highlights that the key to enjoy the text scattered around Imotaro's lays in engaging with wordplay. Nonsensical, trivial wordplay. That is the point of the text in this spread. Second, many chapters helps reader understand what to expect from a Kusazōshi. I'm not talking in terms of contents. Contents are too varied to even attempt any meaningful of mapping them. Contents are not the point here. We call Kusazōshi graphic narratives narratives. So do they have a story? Is there a narrative? Some do. Some indeed push a story through their entire length. As such, Kusazōshi read like pieces of fictional narrative prose. That is very much true for the later embodiments of Gokan, combined booklets. And what I love about our volume is that for the first time ever in English language scholarship, there are multiple chapters devoted to short Gokan. We know of the longer Gokan, but very little is known about the 6-volume, 30 folios short Gokan. In chapter 10, Freddie Fielden, one of our PhD students, takes us through a complex story that relights the master plot of a famous storyline that traveled from 14th century China to 19th century Japan, the Peony Lantern. And some of you may have read it as reshaped by Lafcadio Hearn in 1899, and more recently by Matsuda Aoko as translated by Polly Barton in Where the Wild Ladies Are. Fielden explores an adaptation published in 1809 of the same story, limning a very complex mediatic rhizome that enriches what is a convoluted story of revelations and betrayals. Sato Satoru, in chapter 11, explores an 1814 Gokan that adapts what was a classic of the kabuki stage, unfortunately not performed anymore nowadays. And there is a great deal about the interaction with the kabuki stage, but I decided not to talk about it today. And in this chapter, we have decided to take space to present a detailed synopsis of a very complex plot, to allow our readers to develop a sense of what it means to read a text like this. The plot is complex, riddled with puzzles and mysteries, very complex human relations, And the reading experience is constantly frustrating our need for answers, pushing us to continue reading in order to unravel the many unknowns. This is a type of Kusazōshi. And yet, there are many Kusazōshi that completely lack any storyline. If you're looking for a story, it's not there. Chapter 4 offers this delightful example of a yellow cover book. On each half folio, they explore a different facet of the same topic. What happens when fashion goes wild? And so the iconic Honda top knot, which should look like that to the left, goes wild and becomes extremely elongated. There is no story. The charm of this Kusazōshi lies not in following a protagonist through a story. The charm lies in enjoying a new spin around a common theme, fashion going wild, at every page turn. Each scene is a discrete vignette that can be enjoyed on its own. And that is why the medium of Kusazōshi was also used to package jest books, collections of short, humorous stories, as chapter 4 explores. So throughout the chapters, we learn how to read both story-driven and story-lacking Kusazōshi without getting frustrated with any of the two. Third, our volume explores how full appreciation of Kusazōshi is achieved by tuning in with the cultural literacy that was expected from the reader at the time. And I would like to mention this example from chapter 6, written by Tanahashi Masahiro. And Tanahashi Masahiro is a true pioneer. This man has spent the first half of his life reading every single yellow cover book that has survived in the archive. We are talking about 3,000, and has produced a 5-volume book entitled Kibyōshi Soran, where he gives us basic information for any kibyōshi. It's our Bible. And you can imagine how chuffed we were when he agreed to write for our volume. In chapter 6, Tanahashi looks at the very first kibyōshi, Kinkin Sensei Eiga no Yume, Mr. Glittering Gold Stream of Splendor, issued in 1775, also translated into English. The canonical reading of this graphic narrative insists on its intertextuality, delving into how it adapts the literary motif of the Pillar of Kantan. Tanahashi goes against that and offers a new reading, arguing that the beauty of this text is first and foremost a celebration of the here and now. Tose, tose. Tanahashi's careful close reading of the text reveals that it is replete with little gems, asking readers to get the references to what was topical. The choice of meguro for the protagonist to have a nap, the protagonist's headgear, the language used by the prostitutes he mingles in Fukagawa, and much more. All is there, challenging the reader. Do you get it? Do you get the reference? That's the point. It is a form of reading akin to a hunting expedition. And if you are the reader who gets the reference, you feel part of a community that shares your cultural knowledge. In this chapter, Kusazōshi are reframed as a form of literature that fosters a sense of belonging. They produce and reinforce a sense of identity. And for us, this volume allows our readers in 21st century Britain to become that reader and to belong to this culture. Finally, our volume places great emphasis on Kusazōshi as literature that embodies what we call the aesthetic of the inconsequential. I will delve more on this aspect at the book launch, which is planned in Cambridge on the 14th of October. And I must say, this is one of the biggest aspects of early modern graphic narratives, but in general, early modern commercial literature, that is quite hard to deal with. We're dealing with texts that are not particularly meaningful. They don't make us think about the bigger issues that we are used to read when we engage with literature. Here I will leave you with a delightful example from chapter 8. Kobayashi Fumiko works on Kibyoshi written and illustrated by Hokusai. The 1801 Chigomonju Osana Kyokun, Lessons from Manjushri for Children, is a tour de force, folio after folio, in wordplay, coupled with almost visionary images. The story, not important really, is about monkeys turned into human beings. Now, when they turn into human beings, they are defective human beings. Their defects are expressed via idiomatic expressions. Take the woman on the left. Look at her face. Her tongue is long, really long. And the text tells us that she is shita no nagai, long-tongued, and an expression that has a metaphorical meaning akin to loose-tongued in English. And I must say, I had a lot of trouble in helping our author with this chapter because it's all one idiomatic expression after the other. The metaphorical meaning shapes the character of this bidimensional character. The literal meaning is translated into images. There is a fracture created between the image, who is representing the literal meaning, and the text, which is using the metaphorical meaning. The fracture leads to delightful nonsense. There is nothing heavy, meaningful about this. And nonsense, muda in Japanese, was indeed identified by Kusazōshi writers as a key ingredient for a successful Kusazōshi. So retrieving the aesthetics that imbued Kusazōshi is an essential part of this project. Here I'm going into the publicity bit. If you want to discover more, by all means, take advantage of the 35% that Brill offers you today. There is a leaflet outside. For the time being, I would like to leave you with the image I started with. The man sitting in the middle is engrossed in reading a Kusazōshi. A pile of other Kusazōshi can be seen on his left. He's spoiled for choice. So are we when approaching the study of this type of book. Our edited volume entices 21st century readers to the study of these rich fields and hopes for more research on facets of the Kusazōshi world that we do not cover. Join us in this exciting intellectual quest. Thank you very much.